The first time she said it, I thought it was just a joke. A quip tossed out with the same sharp-edged smile she always wore, like a blade polished to perfection. "Stay in your lane," she said, almost sing-song, as if my voice didn't matter. In that room full of polished egos and backroom whispers, I remember standing there, folder in hand, my proposal trembling slightly between my fingers, not from fear, but from the collision of anger and disbelief. Her words didn't pierce immediately. They sank slowly, like a stone dropped into water, reaching the bottom only when I was alone with my thoughts and silence. She was the kind of woman who built empires by climbing ladders others hadn't noticed. Yet, and once at the top, she made sure the rungs were slippery for anyone behind her. Her suits were always sharp, her eyes sharper, and her words were surgical strikes, always calculated to make someone smaller, someone quieter. And I, then, was still learning to find the volume of my own voice. But something about the way she said it, like my presence was a misstep, an error in navigation. I felt it crawl beneath my skin and settle there like a slow-burning coal. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, imagining all the lanes she thought belonged to her, all the ones she had patrolled like a traffic cop with a vendetta. I thought about the hours I'd spent building that proposal, the strategy stitched together with care, the nights I spent alone with numbers and dreams. And I thought about the flicker of amusement in her eyes when she dismissed me. Something inside me, something deeper than hurt pride, began to shift. It wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was reclamation, a declaration. If I was going to be told to stay in my lane, then I would redefine the whole damn road. The next morning, I didn't go to the office. I went to the bank. I sat across from my advisor, a man who had watched me go from college intern to mid-level strategist, and told him I wanted to liquidate nearly everything. His brows lifted, hands folded. "You're serious?" he asked. I nodded once. "She told me to stay in my lane," I said, "so I'm buying the road." He didn't ask further questions. Maybe he saw the fire in my eyes, or maybe he just knew that some people, once pushed hard enough, stop looking for permission and start building empires of their own. In the weeks that followed, I moved in silence. I pulled old contacts from dusty corners of my life. People who owed me favors, people who remembered the way I used to work, people who had once been told to stay in their lane too. I started a company. Not just any company, but one designed to swallow everything she thought she owned. A rival. A mirror. A storm with my name etched into every gust. I worked through nights with coffee and fury, with ambition that tasted like metal and memory. I remembered every boardroom where I'd been talked over, every meeting where my ideas were nodded at only when someone else said them louder. And I remembered her face the day she told me I didn't belong where she stood. The first time she heard my name attached to the startup making noise in her space, I imagine her brows knitting just slightly. Not enough to show concern, just enough to raise a question. The second time, when we underbid her on a contract she thought was guaranteed, I knew she started paying attention. I knew because she called me. The number flashed on my phone like a ghost I wasn't sure I wanted to face. I let it ring twice before I answered, voice calm, tone polite. "Hello?" I said, as if we were old friends and not silent rivals. Her voice was clipped. "So I see you're still trying to make waves." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "No," I replied. "I'm building oceans." Her silence stretched, taut and tight. And then she laughed, short and cold. "Just be careful," she said. "Roads can collapse under the weight of ego." I didn't respond. There was no need. My silence said everything. This time, I was the one with the map. The first contract we stole from under her was small, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of things, a boutique tech firm looking to rebrand. But it mattered. Not because of the money, or even the exposure. It mattered because it was won. of her clients, one of her long-standing loyal pillars that had once called her name synonymous with excellence. When they signed with us, I didn't celebrate. I simply stood at my window, watching the city breathe beneath me, and let the weight of the moment settle into my bones. It was the first crack in her kingdom's foundation, and it was only the beginning. I poured every ounce of myself into the company. I slept in the office more than I slept at home, my desk cluttered with empty coffee cups and printouts streaked with highlighter and notes scrawled in the middle of the night. I became the architect of something new, something bold, something unafraid. My team began to grow. People like me, people who had been underestimated, overlooked, passed by. We weren't the polished, performative professionals she kept in her court. We were raw, hungry, and unwilling to accept the roles we had been assigned. Every pitch we made felt like war paint. Every client win was a battle cry. She began to notice. I saw it in the shift of her company's public tone, suddenly warmer, more inclusive, as if trying to mimic the language we were using, the empathy we were weaving into business models. She tried to catch up, but she was too late. She had built an empire on intimidation and tradition. I was building one on trust, transparency, and rebellion. She thought success came from fear. I was showing people that success could be driven by purpose and precision, that you didn't have to crush others to rise. She showed up at one of our conferences. I didn't expect her to come in person. She usually sent sleek representatives, the kind with crisp accents and sharp eyes. But this time, it was her. She walked through the doors like she still owned every room she entered, heels clicking like punctuation marks against the polished floor. When I saw her standing in the back during my keynote, arms folded, expression unreadable, I felt that old heat rise in my chest. But it wasn't fear anymore. It was fuel. I spoke louder. I looked directly at her when I said, "We were told to stay in our lanes. But the truth is, we are the ones paving the highways now, and we're not stopping for permission anymore." There was no applause pause. I didn't build in those breaks. I didn't want performance. I wanted revolution. She left before I was done speaking. I didn't watch her go. I let her absence speak for itself. But what followed was darker. Subtle, but sharp. Whispers in the industry that we were unstable. Anonymous leaks about our supposed inexperience, our unorthodox approach to clients. One of our contracts was mysteriously pulled without reason, and an internal source confirmed she had personally interfered. She hadn't just noticed us. She felt threatened. And like any empire facing erosion, she resorted to sabotage. I didn't retaliate. Not directly. I didn't need to. I focused on building stronger alliances, making sure no one who worked for me felt disposable. We weren't just building a company, we were building a movement. One that protected its own. And that was something she couldn't replicate. Because loyalty isn't born from fear, it's born from belief. Still, the games continued. She started a new initiative, eerily similar to one I'd unveiled weeks earlier. Same language, same structure, but hers felt hollow, like a knockoff perfume trying to capture the scent, but missing the soul. My team noticed. "She's copying. You?" they said, almost angry, but I only smiled. "She's trying to keep up," I said. "But she forgot. I'm not in a lane anymore. I own the road. And I'm building more every day." Then came the Investor Gala, a black tie event crawling with suits and smiles so sharp they could cut glass. I wasn't planning on attending, but when I heard she would be receiving a legacy award, I couldn't resist. I didn't go to gloat. I went to witness, to remind myself how far I'd come and how far I still intended to go. The ballroom was a palace of glass and velvet, the air thick with ambition and expensive cologne. She took the stage, bathed in white light, every movement deliberate. She delivered a speech filled with platitudes about vision and tenacity, and for a moment, I almost believed she believed it. But then her eyes found mine in the crowd, and I saw it. The hesitation, the flicker of recognition that the world she dominated was shifting beneath her. I smiled, just slightly, not cruelly, just enough for her to know that I wasn't going anywhere. After the ceremony, she approached me. Not publicly. No, she was too smart for that. She found me near the balcony, away from the lights, where only the city and the stars could hear. "You've made quite a name for yourself," she said, sipping champagne. I nodded, returning her gaze. "I had to," I replied. "There wasn't a seat for me at your table." She tilted her head. "So you built your own?" I shook my head. "No, I bought the whole building." Her laugh was soft this time, not cold, almost respectful, and that was the second shift. She didn't laugh again after that night. Whatever sliver of respect flickered between us at the gala evaporated in the weeks that followed. Maybe she thought that moment of civility meant I would slow down, that I'd become content with recognition and let her empire breathe again. But I wasn't interested in sharing air anymore. I'd spent too long suffocating under ceilings she helped build. Ceilings that were never meant to let people like me through. I didn't just want a seat or a table or even the building. I wanted to rewrite the blueprint, pour new concrete, raise new steel, and carve out windows that let the light in for everyone she'd once told to stay small. By the end of that quarter, we had tripled in size. The startup label no longer applied. We weren't scrappy anymore. We were sharp, structured, and unstoppable. She saw the shift. So did the rest of the industry. We were securing clients that once signed with her exclusively, the kind of contracts that made news, the kind that came with midnight calls from board members asking how we'd done it. But we hadn't used her playbook. We hadn't needed to. That was what scared her most. We had changed the rules, and she couldn't keep up without playing a game she didn't understand. It got uglier. She launched a campaign meant to undercut our reputation. Press releases veiled as concern, warnings about the dangers of untested innovation, carefully timed social media narratives meant to paint us as reckless and chaotic. She even leaked internal reports suggesting we were hemorrhaging money, cherry-picked data twisted to sound damning. It almost worked. Investors started to get nervous. A few partners pulled back. The whispers grew again, louder this time, and I could feel the ground shifting beneath us. That week, I didn't sleep at all. I walked the office hallways at 3 a.m., staring out at a city that still shimmered with promise even when I was filled with doubt. The pressure was heavy. Heavier than I'd imagined. I remembered what she had said months ago about roads collapsing under the weight of ego. But this wasn't ego anymore. This was something deeper. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing this so no one would ever feel as small as I had felt in that room the day she first dismissed me. I was doing this to prove a new path could exist, and not just for me. I called an emergency meeting. My core team showed up without hesitation, bags under their eyes and fire still in their chests. I stood in front of them, voice raw, and told them everything about the lies being spread, the fear being seeded, the empire trying to crush us from beneath its velvet glove. "This isn't just a company anymore," I told them. "It's a declaration. If we let her erase us now, we don't just lose, we prove her right." There was a long silence. Then someone stood up. Then another. Then another. No one left. No one faltered. The next day, we went public with the truth. We released our own reports, transparent, verifiable, and backed by a third-party audit. We posted videos of our workspaces, testimonials from clients who had seen tangible, life-changing results from what we built. We opened our books wider than anyone had expected, and in doing so, we turned the narrative on its head. The industry didn't see recklessness. They saw courage, vulnerability, integrity, something rare, something they hadn't seen in her for years. The tide turned. Investors returned. New ones came. The contracts we thought were lost came back with better terms. Even the media began to shift, writing not just about our resilience but our refusal to play dirty, our insistence on transparency in a world that had learned to trade in illusion. That was when she called again. It wasn't a warning this time. It wasn't posturing. Her voice was quieter now, clipped not by power but by the weight of something she hadn't anticipated. Uncertainty. "I didn't think you'd last this long," she said. I didn't reply. "You really think you've won?" she asked, but her voice lacked venom. "This isn't about winning," I said. "It's about changing the game." She paused. "You're not like me," she said at last, almost with a trace of sadness. "You don't need to be," I told her. "I watched you long enough to know what not to become." We didn't speak again. Her company began to shrink, quietly, without headlines. The kind of decline that happened not through collapse, but through erosion. Clients moved on, employees left. She remained at the top, but the tower had started to crack, and cracks only grow if ignored. Meanwhile, we kept building. We didn't just expand, we educated. We opened mentorship programs for voices that had been silenced, partnered with startups led by people who'd once been told they weren't serious enough. We started hosting summits focused not on competition, but collaboration. People came, people listened, people stayed. I kept the folder from that first day, the one I had held when she told me to stay in my lane. It sits in my office now, framed behind glass. Not as a reminder of her, but as a reminder of who I used to be. The version of me that stood in silence, unsure if I deserved to speak. That version is gone, and the road I've built stretches farther than I ever imagined. Years passed, the war quieted, but its echoes never fully disappeared. What began as a battle between two names, two visions, two realities had become something much larger, an evolution, a shift. And though I no longer thought of her every day, though her name didn't linger on my lips or burn behind my eyes like it once did, the shadow of that first dismissal still hung in the air like a faint watermark. She had marked me, yes. But what she didn't know was that the mark became a map. I drove past her building one evening, a cold winter night painted with the orange glow of city lights and wet sidewalks. Her name still stood there, etched in silver across the glass, but it no longer felt immortal. It felt like a relic, a monument to the way things used to be. The lights inside were dimmer, the lobby quieter. The legacy she once ruled had begun to soften around the edges, like paper left out in the rain. I parked across the street just for a moment and stared up at it. I remembered how I used to look at that building like a mountain I could never climb. Now it looked small, familiar, almost like something I had outgrown. I didn't stay long. There was no need to. Back at my own headquarters, the lobby was alive with energy. Designers laughing over sketches, analysts debating predictions, interns wide-eyed and fearless. The air wasn't sterile or hushed like hers once was. It was full of movement, music, voices. My company wasn't built on fear or loyalty bought with perks and threats. It was built on belief. I saw it in every conversation, in every decision made at the edge of risk. And I knew, with more clarity than ever, that I had done what she couldn't. I had created something that could breathe without me, but I didn't disappear. They asked me to speak at a global conference, the kind that used to invite her. Now, they wanted me. The woman who didn't stay in her lane. The woman who built the road. I stood backstage in the moments before, listening to the hum of thousands waiting on the other side of the curtain. I could hear them murmuring my name, reading the pages of my journey in whispers, speculating on what I would say. But I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. When I stepped out into the spotlight, I didn't see strangers. I saw every version of myself that had ever doubted, every hand that had trembled while pushing against walls others said would never move. I took a breath, and I spoke, not as a symbol, not as a product of vengeance, but as proof. Proof that you can be told you don't belong and still become impossible to ignore. I was told, I said, to stay in my lane. I was told I didn't belong at the table, that I should wait my turn, that I should dim my light to make others comfortable. But that's the lie they tell you when they see what you might become. The truth is, there are no lanes, just paths we are brave enough to create. So I made mine, and now I make space for others to walk it with me. There was silence at first, and then a standing ovation that lasted for what felt like a lifetime. The months that followed, people from all over the world reached out. Not just young dreamers or underdogs, but people who had once stood on the other side. People who had been part of the system that excluded others. They told me they were changing how they led, how they hired, how they listened. Some admitted to being like her. Some admitted they still were. But the difference now was that they wanted to be better. That was the legacy I wanted. I never sought to destroy her. I never needed to. In the end, the world changed without her. That was always the real victory. Years later, I received a letter, handwritten, from her. It arrived in a plain envelope with no return address, though I knew the handwriting instantly. I stared at it for a long time before opening it, unsure if I wanted to hear her voice again, even through ink. But eventually I did. It was short, sincere. I see now what I couldn't before. You didn't just build a road. You built a world I never thought could exist. And I realize now, I was never afraid of you. I was afraid of the truth you carried, that I had become the very thing I once fought against. I hope wherever you go next, you keep building. The world is better. For it, there was no signature, just a quiet surrender, not of power, but of pride. I didn't respond. Some stories don't need an epilogue. Today, I walk through the offices we've opened around the globe. I listen to voices that were once ignored, now leading with brilliance and grace. I see innovation, born not from competition, but from compassion. I see a generation that doesn't ask for lanes, they ask for skies. They build bridges where others drew borders, and when people ask me how I did it, how I kept going after being told no so many times, I smile. I tell them, she told me to stay in my lane, so I bought the whole road, and now I make sure it never has a speed limit.